I could just absolutely go crazy. Listen, I've been trying to like try out this new microphone and like this other new camera for like ever now, and it just does not work the way that I want it to, because I'm pretty sure that I was sitting here reading for like 15 minutes before I realized that it wasn't even playing. So, toxic communities, okay? Dorceta E. Taylor. I am doing a guided reading on chapter 2. We're gonna pause when we go over the spatial. What's going on with this camera? Yay! Oh, whatever. What's life? You can't laugh at yourself. Okay. Chapter 2. Toxic communities. We're going to do this. Okay. An early and often used explanation for exposure to environmental hazards is racial and class discrimination. Proponents of this thesis argue that hazardous facilities are disproportionately located in minority and low-income areas, and that these patterns are the result of discrimination. Since the early 1980s, numerous studies have made this claim. These include landmark studies analyzing the sitting of hazardous facilities in poor Black, Hispanic, and Native American communities. Now, the court cases are listed in here, okay? And what I've done is I have got the references and the index links to the links to the index and reference pages of this book on my blog, and I usually keep them on every single lesson that I'm doing at the very bottom. So if you go to lesson 3, they should be at the bottom where it says references. So when I'm mentioning like Bullard, 1983, 1990, 1993A, that means go find those reference pages, look for it's in alphabetical order, by the way, look for the B's, and then find the corresponding things. This is a video, so if you need to rewind it, feel free. Anyway, so Bullard, Bloomberg, and Gottlieb, Gottlib. Sometimes I spell things because I'm either butchering their name, or you might need to know how to spell it so that you can look it up. USGAO, 1983, UCC, 1987, Mohai and Bryant, Mohai, I could be saying that wrong. I'm all for being corrected. Mohai and Bryant, 1992. H. White, 1992. Bailey and Faupel, Faupel, 1992. Robinson, 1992. Ledoux, 1993. Collin and Harris, 1993. Lee, 1993. Furthermore, scholars argue that discrimination can be institutional or non-institutional, direct or indirect, intended or unintended. Fagan and Fagan, 1978, 1986, 2003, Knowles and Pruitt, like Beyonce Knowles and Pruitt, Prewitt, 1970, and Wellman, Wellman, 1977. They also argue that disproportionate sitting of hazardous facilities in minority and low-income communities forces residents of such communities to accept greater risk than what is deemed acceptable. Hurd, Hird, 1994. The disproportionate sitting and discrimination thesis is one of the most contentious theories in environmental justice research, as many scholars are on both sides of the argument. Of the two claims of racial and social class discrimination, the claim of racism has been more controversial. Several early environmental justice studies claim that race and class discrimination were important factors in explaining why hazardous facilities were located in minority and low-income communities. Goldman and Fitton and Comancho, Comacho, 1998. However, studies analyzing the racial and income disparities in exposure to air pollution and pesticides began appearing in the 1960s. During the 1970s, researchers began publishing studies of racial and income disparities in exposure to hazardous waste and proximity to hazardous waste facilities. For example, Berry's study, 1977, found that both income and race were factors explaining proximity and exposure to environmental hazards, but that race was more significant. In 1983, Robert Bullard, a sociologist, published a landmark study that examined the sitting pattern of waste dumps in Houston and asserted that the dumps were not randomly scattered over Houston landscape. Instead, they were located in predominantly black communities and near schools. Bullard found that 4 of 5 of the city's incinerators were located in predominantly black neighborhoods, while the 5th was found in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. 2 of the city's 3 mini incinerators also operated in predominantly black neighborhoods. Bullard also found that 5 of Houston's 6 municipal landfills were located in predominantly black neighborhoods. At the time of the study, blacks constituted only 27.6% of Houston's population. Bullard studied the relationship between landfill sitting and schools and found that all 10 of the landfills permitted by the city from 1920 to 1976 were near predominantly black schools. So were 66% of the 47 solid waste sites and 77% of the municipal landfill permitted by the Texas Department of Health, TDH, between 1953 and 1978. Browning Ferris Industries also operated landfills in Houston, and 86% of the 21 landfills operated by the company between 1970 and 1978 were close to predominantly black schools. I'm kind of seeing a pattern here, but I think that's the point. Another landmark study was released the same year Bullard's study was published in 1982. Representative Walter Fauntroy, Fauntroy, one of the black congressmen who participated in the Warren County protests, asked the GAO, General Accounting Office, to conduct a survey of the sitting of hazardous waste landfills in EPA's Region 5, IV. The study, published in 1983, found that 3 of the 4 communities in which off-site hazardous waste landfills were found were predominantly black. The host communities also had lower incomes than surrounding census tracts. USJO 1983. A year later, Greenberg and Anderson, 1984, published a study of hazardous waste sites in New Jersey in which they identified racial disparities in sitting. Gould, Gould, of the Council of Economic Priorities, published a national study in 1986 in which he examined the production of toxic wastes in zip codes. Gould divided the population into 5 income categories and found that zip codes with the lowest income had the highest per capita production of toxic wastes, around 1,000 pounds per year. There was not a straightforward correlation between income and toxic waste production. Gould also found that zip codes with the second highest average income had the second highest per capita production of toxic waste, 980 pounds per year. The study was followed by Bullard and Wright's 1986 article on waste facilities in black communities in the South. Of the early studies, none generated more attention than the 1987 United Church of Christ UCC study, Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States. That's the title. The report was commissioned after some members of the church's Commission for Racial Justice participated in the Warren County protests. The report contained findings of 2 cross-sectional studies that examined the location of commercial hazardous waste facilities and uncontrolled toxic waste. The study, which relied on zip code analysis, found that race was a stronger predictor of the location of the commercial hazardous waste facilities. Though income was an important explanatory factor, race was more significant. The study found that 3 of the 5 largest hazardous waste landfills in the U.S. were located in predominantly black and Hispanic communities. The findings were similar when uncontrolled waste sites were studied. The report found that 3 out of the 5 black and Hispanic residents Black and Hispanic residents lived in communities with uncontrolled toxic waste sites. Furthermore, large percentages of blacks lived in metropolitan areas with the largest numbers of uncontrolled toxic waste sites. The study described the inordinate concentration of waste sites in black and Hispanic communities and argued that the possibility that these patterns resulted by chance is virtually impossible. That's the UCC 1987 study, and UCC stands for United Church of Christ. They did a pretty good study on racial justice. Several studies employing spatial and non-spatial analytic techniques were published in the 6 years following the release of the UCC report. These studies supported the claims of toxic waste and race in the United States. That's the name of the study. Toxic waste and race in the United States. These include Buller and Wright's 1987A, 1987B. Go to my blog, www.southernfriedsocialist.com. This is lesson 3 of Toxic Communities, but it's chapter 2 in the book. But if you go to that, at the very bottom, it has the references and the index pages. And, what else? Oh, and vocabulary. So, anyway. So that people know what I'm talking about when they just hear me, like, spitting out random words in between sentences. So, Bullard and Wright's papers that examined hazardous waste disposal in black communities in the South. Excuse me. Bellevue, Belliveau, Kent and Rosenbaum, Rosenbaum, 1989, analyzed blacks' exposure to toxic releases emanating from industrial facilities in Richmond, California. In Richmond, California. Bloomberg and Gottlieb published War on Waste in 1989. The book examined decisions on site incinerators in black and Hispanic communities in California. The same year, researchers from Auburn University published the findings of their survey of residents' attitudes toward the landfill in Emelle, Alabama. Emelle. And that if index references Bailey, Fopple, Holland, and Warren, 1989. Bullard's Dumping in Dixie, which chronicled the practice of hazardous waste disposal in black communities in the South, was published in 1990. In 1991, K. Brown found that the toxic waste emanating facilities were disproportionately located in black communities in St. Louis, and that such communities were exposed to higher toxic air releases. A Greenpeace report authored by Costner and Thornton in 1991 also examined the racial disparities in exposure to incinerator emission. Mohai and Bryant, Mohai, examined racial disparities in proximity to commercial hazardous waste facilities in Detroit and found that minorities were more than likely than whites to live in close proximity to such facilities. An underlying assumption of the disproportionate sitting and discrimination thesis is the idea that minorities resided in communities selected to host hazardous facilities before the facilities were built. I want to say that one more time because it's kind of important. An underlying assumption of the disproportionate sitting of these hazardous facilities is that these minorities, these people moved into these areas after these facilities were there. And that is not true. These people lived here and these facilities were built there. Okay? In other words, minority communities are deliberately sought out and targeted for the placement of noxious facilities. Supporters of this thesis have provided many examples, including black communities such as Emelle, Alabama, Riceville, Texas, Alson, Louisiana, King and Queen County, Virginia, and King and Queen County, Virginia, in which landfills were placed. West Dallas, where a lead smelter operated in a predominantly black community near a school. The unincorporated community of Institute, West Virginia, where Union Carbide built a giant chemical plant that manufactured methyl isocyanate beside a historically black university. And the Diamond Tract in Norco, Louisiana, that is sandwiched between the massive Norco industrial complex and two shell oil plants. Committees such as the South Central Los Angeles and Kettleman City, California, and Chester, Pennsylvania, where black and Hispanic residents lived in neighborhoods before incinerators were placed in them, were also used as examples. Researchers also pointed to South Tucson, where Hispanics were exposed to trichloroethylene, TCE, that contaminated the groundwater supplies after Hughes Aircraft and other industries dumped waste in Desert Arrows in the city's south side. Clark and Gerlach, Gerlak, just like it sounds, Gerlach, Native American Native American reservations were also cited as places where minority populations lived before hazardous facilities were placed on them. On my blog on this particular chapter, this is lesson 3, but chapter 2, at the very bottom, I have a few videos that are like pulled from all sorts of documentaries that's talking about that issue right there of Native American land. And like I personally, I went to North Dakota to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the Dakota Access Pipeline was originally going to go through Bismarck, but it was an all-white community, and like the community didn't even have to go out and fight and like vote and like argue over it. Everybody who's like white and rich there was like, you ain't doing that, no, and it didn't get done. So they rammed it straight through the sacred land of the Native Americans. That's another story. Skepticism and Controversy. As EJ environmental justice activism expanded and the publicity generated from the UCC report and subsequent studies grew, so did skepticism about environmental justice claims. Ergo, by 1993, studies refuting the claims of the UCC study were being published by scholars and representatives of the waste management industry. One of the earliest and most vocal critics of the EJ claims was Charles McDermott, Director of Government Affairs for Waste Management. He testified before a House subcommittee that there is little evidence that emissions from waste facilities pose the greatest risk to the average minority community. McDermott criticized the UCC's study use of the 1980 census data. He argued that while the UCC analysis told us about the post-sitting demographic characteristics of host communities, it told us nothing about the demographic characteristics of the host communities at the times the facilities were built. Arguing for the use of the 1970 census data instead. McDermott stated that to presume discriminatory intent, it is crucial that the demographic snapshot be taken as close to the time of sitting as possible. McDermott, 1993. Management conducted its own study of the demographic characteristics of the host communities in 130 of its solid waste and hazardous waste disposal sites and incinerators in 1991. WMX Technologies, 1991. The study, completed a few months after the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held in Washington, D.C., employed the same methodological techniques. I'm getting tongue-tied tonight. Used in the UCC study. The waste management study found that 76% of the company's disposal facilities were located in communities with a white population that was equal or greater to than the average of the host state. Law professor Vicki Bean was another early critic of the UCC report, and another environmental justice. Law professor Vicki Bean was another early critic of the UCC report and other environmental scholarship. She published a series of articles between 1993 and 1997 in which she argued that hazardous facilities were not disproportionately cited in minority communities. She argued that the analysis should be focused on the demographic characters of the neighborhoods at the time the facilities were being built. I'm real sorry, but like, if people have always lived there, and then you build something over it, I don't know why you have to know everything that okay. Bureaucracy. Oh, I'm trying to find it, y'all. Give me just 1 second. Waste Management funded a group of researchers from the Social and Demographic Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst to examine the sitting patterns of toxic storage and disposal facilities, TSDFs, and abandoned waste sites. Between 1994 and 1997, the researchers, who also were receiving funding from the EPA to conduct their study, published a series of articles critiquing the UCC study and other environmental justice scholarship. They critique the use of zip codes in the UCC report. They use census tactics instead of in their analysis. That's Anderson and Anderton, Anderton, and Oakes, 1994. Anderton, Oakes and Fraser, Anderton, Oakes and Egan, Oakes, Anderton, and Anderson. Okay. If any of that doesn't make sense, that's the court cases, and I have the references posted on my blog, and references and the index. So all you got to do is just rewind back to whatever you want to look up, and then ta-da. The disproportionate sitting and discrimination thesis has been challenged on several levels, and alternate theories have been proposed. But they're discussed in later chapters. So we're getting into this. We're only in chapter 2. For instance, researchers reported that they found no weak or inconsistent evidence that social class was associated with proximity to hazardous facilities. They also reported finding no weak or inconsistent evidence that race was associated with the proximity to hazardous facilities. That's been 1993, 1995, Zimmerman 1994, Glickman, G-L-I-C-K, man, Golding and Hirsch, 1995, Pollock and Vitas, V-I-T-T-A-S, 1995, Hamilton, 1995, Oakes and Anderton, 1996, Yandle, Y-A-N-D-L-E, and, my phone was low battery mode. Shepard and McCaster, Lettner and Tian, T-I-A-N, 1999. Perlin, Wong and Sexton, 2001. Bowen, 2002. Graham, 1999. Atlas, 2002. And, in fact, Downey, 2005, argues that racial characteristics of the neighborhoods around Detroit's manufacturing facilities do not result from income equality or racist sitting practices. They are a function of residential segregation, which has reduced blacks' exposure to industrial pollution. I don't think residential segregation has ever done anything good for the black and brown community. That's my personal opinion, but... However, several scholars have found that race and class are significant predicators of past and future sitting of hazardous facilities. In addition to national studies, such evidence has been found in studies conducted in metropolitan areas all over the country. Here's a long list of these right here are all the studies. These right here are all the studies. I'm going to read them off to you, but on my blog, Toxic Communities, Lesson 3, Chapter 2, I have the index and the references and everything that's on the bottom of it. So, here you go. Mulhauy and Bryant, 1992. Greenberg, 1993. Goldman and Fitton, 1994. Adola, A-D-E-O-L-A, 1994. Hamilton, 1995. Craig, K-R-I-E-G, 1995. U.S. GAO, 1995. Mohai, M-O-H-A-I, 1995, 1996. Goetz and Kemlage, G-O-E-T-Z and K-E-M-L-A-G-E, 1996. Crawford, 1996. Bower, Pastor, Sad, and Snyder. Bowen, Cimabrone, C-I-A-M-B, Cambrone, C-I-A-M-B-R-O-N-E, and Hunter, 1997. Markham and Rufa, 1997. Saza and Musser, S-Z-A-S-Z, and Muser, M-E-U-S-E-R, 1997, 2000. Stratsky and Hogan. Clark and Gerlach, G-E-R-L-A-K, 1999. Newman, Foreman, and Rothland. Hurd and Reese. Sad, Pastor, Bower, Snyder, 1999. Boone and Modaris, M-O-D-A-R-R-E-S, 1999. Faber and Krieg, K-R-I-E-G, 2000. Pastor Salad and Hip. Pastor Salad. Pastor and Sad, S-A-D-D. Lejano, and Iseki. I'm horrible at names. Can you tell? Stretsky and Lynch, Pastor and Sad, Minnis and Jordan, Downey, Ashenfetter, Rehnquist, Morello Frosch, Morello-Frosch, and Lopez. And then it mentions a few other ones. That's a lot of court cases. Not court cases, articles. Anyway, there was a lot of studies done. As researchers continued to test the disproportionate sitting and discrimination thesis, even scholars who have questioned the idea of racial discrimination in sitting have found that facilities for hazardous materials handlers were located close to working class neighborhoods and in areas with higher percentage of minority residents. Davidson and Anderton, 2000. Researchers have also found racial disparities when examining the sitting patterns of specific kinds of facilities. For example, Graham found that race was not a factor in predicting the location of oil refineries. However, the researchers found that the people living around coke plants were disproportionately poor and minority. Moreover, recent scholarship has identified immigrant minority communities as being particularly vulnerable to the sitting of hazardous facilities. Greenwood, McKelland, and Schultz, Schulze, Scholes, 1997, Hunter, 2000, Hunter, White, Little, and Sutton, 2003. It should be noted that environmental justice grew more complex and sophisticated. Not all studies or all researchers fell neatly on either side of the debate. Some studies proved partial support for the claims being made in support of or against the disproportionate sitting and discrimination hypothesis. The same can be said for the investigation of other aspects of environmental justice claims. Okay, so here's the part where I'm kind of thinking that we may just skip ahead to the next part, but I'll show you why. So it's about the unit of analysis. You know what? I'm going to read it to you, and if you get it, you get it, and if you don't, we'll go over it later. The unit of analysis. The modifiable areal unit problem. And there is a graph, and it is on my blog. I took a picture of it. But here is the figure that we're going to be talking about. Okay? Woo! Do you get it? Woohoo! Okay, so you got trace lines, you get numbers. So kind of, when I'm talking about it, kind of visualize that in your head. I have to look at a graph while I'm talking, if you want me to understand it, I have to look and read, The spatial unit of analysis, national, state, region, county, zip code, census tract, census block group, etc., has been a major source of contention in environmental justice research since its inception. This is particularly true of research related to exposure to hazards. Yet despite the attention paid to the problem, the appropriate unit of analysis and the modifiable unit areal unit problem still remain as unresolved challenges. So, scholars argue that reliance on spatial units such as zip codes and census tracts to conduct analysis of spatial relations such as neighborhood segregation or racial and class disparities is problematic. They argue that such analysis rests on assumptions that census tracts approximate neighborhoods and that the tracts are similar in size. However, census tracts, which are determined by the number of residents in an area, not by the real neighborhood boundaries, vary a great deal in size. Therefore, analysis based purely on census tracts can also miss pockets of microsegregation, or clustering, that occur across census tract boundaries. The figure that I showed you illustrates the problems that can arise while using aspatial units in analysis and the logic behind using spatial techniques instead. As the figures show, Facilities 2, 3, and 4 are close together. Okay. You see this? 2, 3, and 4. 2, 3, and from this graph, 2, 3, and 4 are close together. Even though they are located in different tracts, the figure also represents micro-clustering across tracts. Facility 2 is closer to Facility 4 than it is to Facility 1, even though Facility 1 and 2 are in the same consensus tracts. So, Facility 2... So it's kind of showing you how, like, I think the easiest way for me to explain it, if that didn't do it for you, would kind of be like how you can have one zip code can vary very differently from one side town to the other, and I think everybody knows that, you know, other side of the railroad tracks. So, the concern over the unit of analysis is not a trivial one. Some of the earliest and most widely cited studies supporting environmental justice claims used the county, zip codes, and census tracts as units of analysis. Researchers finding no evidence of racial discrimination in the setting of hazardous facilities, or those critiquing the methodology of the USGAO and the UCC reports, also used aspatial units such as counties and census tracts. Census block groups have also been used. Despite criticism regarding the use of aspatial units, recent studies still use counties and census tracts. So everybody uses them, I guess, as units of analysis. Different units of analysis persist in environmental justice research, as scholars are still debating the issue of the scale at which inequities are most pronounced. Some believe that inequities are visible when larger geographic units are analyzed. That comes from the Cutter, Holman, Clark, 1996, and Rehnquist, 2005. While others believe the opposite. Dolinhoy, Dolinoy, and Miranda, 2004, and Raja, Ma, and Yodav, 2008. R-A-J-A, capital M-A, or, you know, separate name M-A, and Yadav, Y-A-D-A-V, and that's 2008. Those are names for you to look up in the references. Noonan, Turag, and Baden, 2009, demonstrate how results can vary by scale. They use logit regression models, logit regression models to conduct a national study of National Priorities List, NPL, sites at 4 geographic scales: counties, zip codes, census tracts, and census block groups. They found the strongest evidence of environmental inequalities at the smaller scales, the census tract and census block group levels. The analysis indicated that areas with larger percentages of blacks and Hispanics were more likely to have an MPL site there. I butchered that last statement, so I'm going to start over because I'd rather do that than just you not understand what I'm saying. The census tract and census block group levels. They found that the strongest evidence of environmental inequalities at the smaller scales, the census tract and the census block group levels. The analysis indicated that areas with larger percentages of blacks and Hispanics were more likely to have an MPL site than were other neighborhoods. Mohai and Saha's 2007 article also contains a detailed discussion of how results in their national study of MPL sites varied depending on the geographic scale, zip code, census tract, or census block group, and the impact gradient within 1 mile radius, beyond a 1 mile radius, within a 3 mile radius, beyond a 3 mile radius, you know. I feel so bad that I'm saying this name wrong. Mohai and Saha's, Mohai and SAHA, and it's there are 2007 study. It's a replication of earlier studies that use the EPA's Resource Conservation and Recovery Information Systems and the Environmental Services Directory to identify the location of facilities. By using the 50% aerial containment method, Mohai and Saha found that the percentage of African American and Hispanic residents was a statistically significant predicator of TSDF location. So that's toxic facilities. Their study also found that the percentage of residents living in poverty, the percentage unemployed, and the percentage employed in precision manufacturing were also significant predicators for toxic dump locations. Toward a more nuanced understanding of exposure and risk, arguing that environmental impacts from hazardous or nuisance facilities are not always manifested in concentric circles, researchers are examining the problems such as noise pollution by using integrated noise models to create computer-generated noise contours or footprints that can be analyzed. Air and water pollution sometimes occur in plumes. Examination of this phenomenon calls for models that can analyze such non-circular impacts. Many of the aforementioned environmental justice studies focus on the question of whether it is race or class that is the strongest predicator of where hazardous facilities are located. The studies identify facilities that release toxins into the environment and correlate with that of the community demographic characteristics. However, this type of analysis does not tell us how risks are shaped by exposure to multiple toxins at varying levels of toxicity. Recent studies are using the EPA's Risk Screening Environmental Indicators, RSEI, database to conduct more fine-grained analyses of exposure and risk. La, 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 la. Oh, I'm trying not to, if I read the whole chapter, we're going to be here all night, so I'm trying to get to the juice. Understanding the impacts of hazardous facilities is not just a matter of assessing who is exposed to an environmental hazard or if a toxic facility is present in or absent from a particular neighborhood. It is also important to assess how hazardous the chemicals or facilities are. Researchers have also pointed to the importance of understanding how firm characteristics such as size, subsidies, and absentee management influence the toxicity of materials used and processed, the volumes of toxins emitted, and the company's response to workers' and residents' claims. That court cases and articles are Pluto, 1996, Rosner and Markovitz, 2002, Cavell, Shriver, and Mix, 2008, Grant, Trotter, Trottner, it's got an N in there, Trautner, Downey, and Thiebad, Thiebaud, Thiebad. I'm so sorry. Ooh. Oh, I'm horrible. I'm horrible at names. Grant and his colleagues conducted conventional regression analysis on RSEI data and found that the percentage of African American and the percentage of Hispanic residents were the strongest predicators of risk toxic emissions. However, when the researchers used fuzzy set analysis on the same data set to examine how firm characteristics and community characteristics combine to produce impacts, they found that race interacted with firm characteristics, size, and subsidiary status to produce the significant effects. Despite considerable disagreements among researchers about the appropriate units of analysis and the methodological techniques that should be used to study the exposure to environmental hazard, the field of inquiry is evolving rapidly. Researchers are asking more complicated questions and employing more sophisticated models. In addition, some of the new techniques show great promise in helping us to understand more fully the factors that lead to and explain the sitting of hazardous facilities. I'm telling you. So that's chapter 2. pretty much did a lot of it. There's all of this right here is all article, like, things, different articles. So, and it's really annoying sometimes. I mean, I love having references, but sometimes I just put it right smack dab in the middle of the sentence, and I'm just kind of like, oh. So anyway, toxic communities, environmental racism, industrial pollution, and residential mobility by Dorceta E. Taylor. Just got done with lesson 3, chapter 2, guided reading. So some parts I skipped out, which was I explained the graph, but I'll probably make another video that goes over it more detailed, because if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know what you're looking at. So it took me a minute. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and let's see if you caught me on Facebook Live, then or if you missed the Facebook Live, then this is going on my blog. So then you're fine. It'll always be there. So if you want to go back and look at something, or you want to hear most of the chapter without going and purchasing the book, just head on over to my website. So thank you.